1949, the brothers Stanley and Colin Smith built the 20-foot boat Nova Espero and sailed her across the Atlantic from Nova Scotia to England. An achievement which stirred not only those who understand the sea, but the general public also.
The Nova Espero, with its gallant two-man crew, Stanley and Colin Smith, comes home to a triumphant reception.
Indeed, it was an historic cruise by the man who designed the famous West Wight Potter sailboat. This video series is an account of the second great voyage in Nova Espero, from Dartmouth, England to Nova Scotia, undertaken by Stanley and his good friend Charles Viollet. We cast off from the railway pontoon at Dartmouth with an overwhelming sense of finality. We acknowledged the friendly cheers of our friends and many well-wishers who had gathered on the harbour front to see us sail. If there is ever a feeling of high endeavour in setting out to challenge an ocean in a small boat, the slightest aura of glory, courage or heroism surrounding the members of the crew, it certainly did not attend our departure. We were depressed and overawed by the prospect before us. The gentle afternoon breeze gradually died as the sun sank below the beautiful hills above the town. A few minutes after we had cast off, the wind dropped completely. The surface of the harbour took on a restful, oily aspect, and we were left embarrassed with sagging sails, only a few hundred yards away from our point of departure. Our old friend Riddell, the pilot, chugged over to us in his launch, took a line from our Samson post and towed us out to sea, thus saving us from the possibility of cheers changing to jeers. We were left to fend for ourselves about a mile beyond the harbour entrance. By this time it was dark, and we looked wistfully back to the lights of Dartmouth. With all our hearts we longed to have the journey behind us. We might now be sailing into port with the joyful expectation of a leisurely few days, without care among the sheltering green slopes, listening to the sound of our favourite port echoing across the valleys. But reality soon began to insist on our attention. The tide turned and we began to drift to the eastward. This in of itself would not have been very disconcerting, but half a mile down our line of drift lay a considerable obstacle, an obstacle rather unlikely to move out of the way for us. It was the Mewstone, a hunk of rock, probably weighing several million tons and shaped like a shattered alligator's tooth. We had no oars on board, as they were not likely to be wanted in the Atlantic, so the boat was out of control. Soon, as we drifted towards the danger, we saw it loom up black and jagged, soaring venomously into the deep soft violet of the night sky. In spite of the slick, glassy surface of the sea, a fairly heavy rolling swell slipped noiselessly beneath us, and as we approached the rocks we heard the ominous roar as it dashed against the foot of the great mass. If we struck, it seemed likely that the Nova would be out of commission for a long time, and the voyage end within a mile or two of its start. We hastily unlashed 2 bamboo spars from the aft mainstays, which we had brought with us to use as spinnaker booms. Then, using these as paddles, began a frantic, agonized fight to get clear. The bamboos were too thin to make much of an impression, and paddling desperately, our lungs felt like bursting. as we quickly burned up our energy. Still we were not clear. The sweat poured down till our eyes were swimming and smarting, but we redoubled our efforts till the blood roared and throbbed in our heads. The strain became more than our arms could bear, and, exhausted, we subsided on the deck, gulping for air. It was several minutes before we recovered, and we sat up. To our immeasurable relief, we saw that we were being swept clear by a narrow margin. After this narrow escape, the remainder of the night was spent in creeping offshore across the western entrance of the English Channel to Ushant, a sinister cluster of islets, rocks, shoals and tide rips, extending several miles off the most westerly tip of France. The wind increased during the following morning, and our log records an unhappy day of cumbersome steep seas, with the wind fresh to strong. We would not be surprised if the log forgot to mention that we suffered a few queasy qualms of wretchedness. On the 26th of May, the second day out, we were becalmed in mid-channel in a very confused sea, which banged and slatted the gear in a most irritating way. Despite this, however, we were able to carry on with overhauling the stores and gear in the cabin. This was work which occupied much of our time in the first few days, for we had to distribute the load throughout the boat and discard all unnecessary weight in case the weather deteriorated. We sorted out the extra sails, stowing those which we thought less likely to be required into the aft locker, which had a small watertight hatch in the deck. The others were prepared for immediate duty. These were the light balloon spinnaker and the small trysail. The less useful sails were the tiny storm jib, about 6 feet along the luff and about 2 feet from luff to clew, made of heavy flax and carried on the first voyage, and the bigger trysail. This was also of heavy flax and brand new. A beautiful sail, but at this time considered by us to be a bit too close to the area of the reefed main to be useful as its alternative. We cooked several hot meals each day and found our pressure cooker a real delight, especially now that we used the timing device. On the previous voyage we had a very small Canadian pressure cooker which did its work perfectly, but even when cooking for only 2 men, a larger one is better, as it is often necessary to heat several cans of food, and it is nice to do the whole lot in one go. A small pressure cooker has many advantages worth considering on a small boat. It saves a great deal of water, for the cooking is done entirely by steam. The saving of fuel is important too, for the cooker heats and cooks very much quicker than the normal boiling method. This saving in time is of prime importance to a man who is cooking under the very difficult conditions we sometimes experience in small craft. It took several days before we really began to visualize the nature of the journey ahead of us. Then we felt terribly depressed at the thought of the dismal hours on watch, and it comforted us little at the time to remind ourselves that we had a snug little cabin with 2 very cosy berths. We think that the motion, continuous, noisy, and infinitely maddening, contributed much to our early despondency. We had gloomy and morbid thoughts about the long months of uncertainty to come. One never knows just how wicked the sea can get. Perhaps the storms we have seen in the past, and upon which we based our ideas of a ship's seaworthiness, would look like a street puddle in a corner draught. It seems that it is not in the nature of humans to be contented. If we are secure and comfortably ensconced in a dull, safe job, we yearn for the thrills and adventures of the traveller and the sight and scent of lands we have only read about. We long to hear the delightful sounds of a foreign language, to listen to music we have never heard before, played on instruments we never dreamt existed, to see people different from those we know so well, laughing and dancing in a different way. We sigh for the clean, fresh smell of the open sea, an unobstructed horizon, more sun, snow, ice, mountains, anything to get away from the drab day-to-day scenes so devoid of romance and interest. Then, as we set forth, having wrenched our freedom from social encumbrances, we tremble within ourselves as we see a different life ahead of us. We wonder fearfully what demands will be made upon us. We try to measure the sea of uncertainty across which we are now committed to sail. We miss the 1,000 little comforts which accompany security. We doubt our strength as we face the bleak, unsheltered struggle ahead, and realize that our very existence may depend upon it. If illness falls upon us, there will be no days in bed to regain our strength, for the elements are relentless and tireless. In this frame of mind, we faced the prospect before us, yet we would not have changed places with anyone.